I found my wife crying in the middle of the night, clutching a piece of paper like it was her death sentence. That's how it started. I was coming back from the kitchen, thirsty after another restless night. I didn't turn on the lights because I didn't want to wake anyone, but there she was, sitting on the cold floor of our bedroom, shaking like a leaf in the harmattan wind. "Jane, what's wrong?" I whispered. She looked up at me, her face soaked in tears, her lips trembling. "It's nothing," she said, trying to stuff the paper under the pillow. But I wasn't buying it. Jane never cries, not like this. I reached for the paper, and she didn't stop me. My heart raced as I unfolded it. It was a hospital report, with her name at the top. The only thing that stood out was the bold letters, HIV positive. My hand started to shake. My thoughts scattered. I couldn't make sense of it. How? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely audible. Jane started talking, her words tumbling out so fast I could hardly keep up. She told me about something that happened years before we even met. She was just 19, still living in her village. There was this man, someone she trusted. A family friend. He had offered to help her with money for school when her parents couldn't afford it. She paused, staring at the floor. "He forced himself on me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't tell anyone because I was ashamed and scared. I sat there, trying to process what she was saying. My chest felt heavy, like a stone was sitting on it. "But you've been fine," I said. "You've never been sick." "I didn't know," she said, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I didn't know until I went to the clinic last week because of the flu that wouldn't go away. They ran tests. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Anger. Fear. Sadness. All of it came at once, and it was overwhelming. But then another thought hit me like a slap to the face. What about me? What about our son? Did they test you? I asked. They said we both need to get tested, she said. Her voice cracked. And the baby. The room started spinning. I thought about our little boy, just 2 years old. His tiny fingers, his bright eyes, his laugh that could light up a room. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I blurted out, immediately regretting how harsh it sounded. Jane flinched like I'd struck her. I didn't know how, she said, tears streaming down her face again. I was scared you'd hate me. Hate her. I looked at her, my wife, the woman I'd promised to love and protect. But in that moment, I didn't know what to say, what to do. My mind was racing with questions I didn't have answers to. The next morning, we went to the clinic together. It felt like the longest car ride of my life. I couldn't even look at her, and I hated myself for it. At the clinic, they pricked our fingers, drew our blood, and told us to wait. That waiting room was a special kind of torture. Every second felt like an hour. Jane sat next to me, her hands in her lap, silent. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know how. I didn't even know how to comfort myself. Finally, the nurse called us in. My palms were sweaty as we walked into the small room. The nurse looked at us with a calm, practiced expression. Your results are negative, she said to me. Relief washed over me so suddenly I almost felt dizzy. And the baby? Jane asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The baby is negative too, the nurse said, and Jane let out a sob that sounded like a mix of joy and heartbreak. We drove home in silence. I kept glancing at her out of the corner of my eye. She looked exhausted, like she'd been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. And maybe she had been. That night, after we put our son to bed, we sat down to talk. Really talk. It wasn't easy. There were tears, and anger, and long silences. But we talked about what happened, about what it meant for her health, for our future. I won't pretend everything is okay now, because it's not. But I made a decision that night. I wasn't going to let this tear us apart. Jane didn't choose this, and neither did I. But we're in it together. And together, we'll figure it out.